Welcome back to our lecture series on inheritance and polymorphism. For this lecture, we will be discussing ArrayList. In order to understand ArrayList, we have to first talk about arrays. The reason why I want to discuss this for this class is I believe array lists are very powerful. Let's first look at arrays and then we'll discuss array lists. So for an array, if you guys can recall from chapter 7 as well as chapter 8, anytime we wanted to create an array, we had to first know what? The exact size of whatever we wanted to make our array bounded to. So we knew we had 6 elements, we had to make an array that had 6. If we created an array with 5 elements and try to pass in 6 elements, we would get a runtime error. So knowing the exact bounds of the array is essential to using arrays. Now, if you have any real-world experience, you will realize that is very limiting. It's really not practical to know beforehand how your code will be used and how many items will be collected in an array. When we do real-world coding, you're usually going to grab data from a user, so user input. You may also grab data from a text file. You may grab data from the internet. There's a lot of different places to grab data from. You're not going to know beforehand how much data will be contained either in that file or how many times the user want to give you interactions. So what we have done in the past, and this is the industry side of me coming out in this lecture, where I was programming in C, and this was there's ways to get around it. You can use linked lists to try to help you through that, but in most cases, the more straightforward way to do this in a language like C, we would just create an array with an arbitrary upper bound that we thought would never get reached. So maybe you've heard these numbers before. 56, 128. I'm sorry, not 56. 64, 128, 256, 512, 1024. So these numbers come from somewhere and they have nothing to do with the resolution. So back in the day when I was a young programmer, we use these numbers as an artificial upper limit to how big an array can be. So let's say we had clients, and some clients had data that, let's say in my code I had an array that was set to 1024 because I said there's no way a text file could have more than 1024 lines of code, or lines, or maybe characters. And let's say one client had more than 1024, then guess what would happen? A runtime error. Let's say I had a client who only had 4 elements in his file. So now I'm creating an array of 1024 elements, but I only have actual 4 data items that I actually will use. In this case, it's not a runtime error, it's just really inefficient coding. So you can see how that's using arrays are very limited when it comes to real world applications. And with arrays, you don't have a lot of functionality. For most cases, we can determine the size of the array, and that's about it. We can do some other things as well, but in most cases, what we use in general would just be determining the size, which we have some functionality, but not a lot of functionality. So let's look at array lists. So for array lists, we never need to know the size. It is an unbounded data item, or I should say a collection. Okay? Array lists are a dynamic set, okay? And it's very useful for real-world applications. I do not need to know how big your data is going to get. My array list will just grow dynamically to support that. Also within array lists, we have extended functionality. So in addition just to getting the size, I can do other things as well with my array list. We won't get into it just yet for this particular lecture and this chapter, but we will go in a little more detail later on. I just want you to know that it does exist. ArrayList is a class, so with each, with this class we have different methods. and these methods gives us a lot more functionality. The reason why I bring this up is because once I learned array lists, I never went back to arrays. I think I learned array lists probably at the turn of the century, and unless I'm just doing coding in class for these type of classes, I never use an array. I've never used arrays when I deliver code to clients, once I've learned what an array list is and how to use it. So I strongly recommend, if you're going to program in object-oriented programming, particularly in Java, I strongly recommend that you learn array lists. Now there are other dynamic arrays or dynamic ways to collect data, but array lists, in my mind, seems to be the more straightforward to use and pretty easy to run with. So I strongly recommend you learn to use array lists, and unless the assignment specifies it, I would use array lists instead of an array, just so that you can become really comfortable with array lists. Again, this is the industry side coming out. Like I said in one of the previous lectures, I have going on almost 20 years of programming experience. So in a discussion like this, you don't see the academic side. You see more of the industry side, where as a programmer, I've worked on both sides, where I was the employee as well as someone like an employer or supervisor, where I cared about what my programmers underneath me were doing, and the ones who knew array lists usually were the ones I felt more comfortable with giving assignments to. So again, I can't stress this enough. Make sure you understand array lists, and I'm going to have an example of what that looks like. So we return back to main vehicle. For no particular reason, I'm using bad abstraction, but it makes getting through this lecture a lot faster and a lot quicker. So I'm going to comment out the code that I no longer need and just look at an array list example. So let's go to this method. So array list, and not only am I using an array list, I'm using a polymorphic call here, where I'm creating a list of vehicles. Okay. Then for each time I want to add to that list, I do the dot add, and then I pass in what I'm adding. So the first three lines, so lines 44, 45, and 46, I'm adding a new car, and I'm just adding it with a different speed. And then in lines 48, 49, and 50, I'm passing in a bicycle, and I am just changing the speed of the bicycle object. So when I finish with the lines 50, I have a list that has 6 elements in it. Let me backtrack for a second. When I finish line 43, I have a list with 0 elements. When I get to line 47, I have a list with 3 elements. And then when I get to line 51, I have a list with this total 6 elements. So you see how this grows. Then I have a for loop here that goes through the items in the list, and then it just displays the speed. So we can run this now. Alright, so the speed, so if you guys recall the display speed method, where it prints out this message, the speed of the blank, where the blank is the name of the object, the name of the class, and then the initial speed that we gave it. So you see how an array list works. Again, there's a lot more power and a lot more things we can do in an array list. We will get into that throughout the remainder of this section. 202 section, that is what I mean. But just for right now, just understand there's a class called an array list, and how to use it. We create it in line 42, and then this is how we add to that array list. So that will conclude this lecture, and we have one more lecture left, and we will conclude chapter 11.